Hello Unity developer and welcome to another video. In this week we are going to look at arrays and you're going to learn more than you ever wanted to. Let's dive right in. If you're like me and love everything to do with gaming, game development and new technologies, then check out my channel. I've got dozens of videos on how to create your own games and the latest in tech. And if you like what you see, why not consider a subscription? Thanks very much and enjoy the video. So far in our tutorials, we've only looked at variables that contain a single value, but sometimes in coding, we'll need to contain a group of data in a single variable. And this is where collection types becomes useful. Collection types are things like arrays, lists, and dictionaries. Each has its strengths and weaknesses, and as we go through them in the upcoming weeks, we'll discover more about them. But today we're going to be taking a look at arrays. Now, arrays are the most basic form of collection that C# offers. And you can think of an array as a group of values known as elements. So let's run through some of the highlights of an array. Arrays can store any type of value, but all the elements need to be of the same type. The length or number of elements an array can have is set when it's created, and it's important to know that this can't be modified afterwards. And if no initial values are assigned when the array is created, each element inside the array will be given the default value of 0 if it's a number type, while any other type gets set to null or nothing. Arrays are the least flexible collection type in C#, mainly because of the fact that you can't modify the length of the array once it's created, and you can't add or remove elements from the array. They are very good at storing information that isn't likely to change, and that lack of flexibility often makes them a faster collection type than the others. So let's go ahead and we'll create our array script. Let's go in my scripts folder, go create C# script, and we'll call this array. Array. And we'll go ahead and create an empty game object in the hierarchy. And we'll go ahead and drop our script onto that object. And then we'll double click it up and learn more about it in Visual Studio. Alright, let's take a look at the basic syntax of the array. Let's go ahead and we'll give ourselves some space and we declare our variables generally at the top of our script, just underneath the class declaration. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a public for a minute. This is the access modifier. And then we want to think about what type of data we want to have in our array. And for this tutorial, we're just going to be having numbers, whole numbers. So we'll use the int for integer, and then we'll call our array first array. Now up till now, this is all generally familiar for when we're looking at our variable tutorials, but the array is going to have a few bits of extra syntax that we haven't come across before. And the first one is a pair of square brackets after our int. Square brackets will look like that, and then we've got our unique name. So this will actually work. This will allow us to create an array, and in the inspector on our game object, you'll see here we have our first array, and we can drop it down, and here we can set the size if we wanted to. So if we wanted to have an array with 3 elements inside of it, then we'll type in our size, and we could add in properties to these elements, like so. One way of doing it. And it's important to remember that arrays are 0 indexed, and that basically means that the element order starts at 0 instead of 1. And you can think of an element's index as its reference or location. So our element 1 here, which is a value of 52, its index is 1. Our value 10 here is at index 0. But don't worry, we'll go ahead and we'll look at that in a bit more detail. So that's one way of doing it, but what about if you want to set your elements attributes in code? So let's jump back into Visual Studio. So if we wanted to declare all of that information in code, where we've declared our first array at the top here, we could then put an equals after the word first array, and then we would type new int, because we have to keep the same element type and enter the amount of elements that we want in our array. Let's say we want 3, like we did before in the inspector. We'll go ahead and save this. So that would be how you would set the size of the array when you initialize it. Let's do another example. Let's say we want to create an array of type int, and we'll call it player score. And let's say we only want to score the top 10 player scores. And we could say new int n, and then finish it off with a semicolon. So if we jump back into Visual Studio, See, we've got our player scores here, and we've got space for 10 elements. But you can also set the value of these elements when we declare a variable. So let's take a look at that. Let's create another public int, make it an array, and we'll call this the top 3 scores. And then we can say new int, and then we can assign values directly to this array by adding them inside a pair of curly braces. So we put in our curly braces, and then we'll add in our scores. So the top score, which is going to have an index of 0, is going to be 500. That's the first one in the array. And then we'll jump down to 300, and then 100. And then you finish it off with a semicolon. So what we've done here is we've created an array, and then we've actually assigned the values. So we can go ahead and save this. If you jump back into Unity, we should see our top 3 scores array pop up there, and it'll have all the values assigned ready for us to go. Now this here is the longhand initializer of an array. There is a shorthand or a shortcut initializer we can use. So I'm going to comment that out a second. We could write it like this: public int top 3 scores, and then we can put that equal sign, and then we can just go straight into assigning the values: 500, 300, and 100. And this is the shorthand or the shortcut way of initializing the variable. And this is a very common way of actually initializing it, and moving forward in upcoming tutorials, I think this will be the way that we actually go about writing it out. We'll keep that one for a minute, and we'll get rid of this for a second. So that is the syntax of the array. You have the access modifier, element type, the name that you're going to give your array, and then if you want to specify values, you can use the shorthand using the curly braces, or if you just simply want to say how many spaces you want in your array, then you can use the new keyword followed by the element type and then the number of elements. Now that we've taken a look at actually initializing our arrays, let's have a sneak peek into how we can access the information contained within them. I'm going to go ahead and remove my update method. We don't need that for a second. If you remember, each element in the array is stored in the order that it's assigned, which is referred to as its index. Arrays are 0 indexed, meaning that the element order starts at 0, so 500 is at 0, 300 is at 1, and 100 is at 2. So you can think of an element's index as its reference or location. So in our top 3 scores here, at 500 is located at index 0, 300 at index 1, and 100 at index 2. And we can locate individual values by using the subscript operator, which is a pair of square brackets that contains the index of the element. Let's have a look and see what that looks like. I'm going to use a simple debug.log, and let's get the value at index 0 of our top 3 player scores. So we're going to look inside our top 3 scores, and you can see it's popped up there already. And we're going to use the subscript operator, which is a pair of square brackets, and then we want index as 0, and then finish it off with a semicolon. So this is going to then access our top 3 scores array and give us the value at index 0. Go ahead and give that a bash. So let's hit play, and here you can see we've got the value of 500, and in our top 3 scores here, value at index 0 is 500. So that's working great. So using the subscript operator, we can also modify the values. So we can say top 3 scores. Let's go ahead and get our value at index 2, and we can say that's going to equal 2000. And then we'll go ahead and change this so we can see it in the editor, in the console. Go ahead and save, and we'll run that. You can see here at the moment, at index 2, the value is 300. Let's go ahead, clear, and then play. You can see here it's set to 2000. So we changed it in our start method, just here. And the last thing I want to talk about is range exceptions. And if you've been using arrays, you've probably come across this in the past. When arrays are created, the number of elements is not changeable, it's fixed, which means we can't access any elements that don't exist. So if in our top scores I was trying to access something with at index 6, go ahead and save that, we only have index 0, 1, and 2. So index 6 doesn't even exist. So what would happen in the inspector? Let's have a look. Go ahead and hit play. We should get a warning, which is the index out of range exception warning that index was outside the bounds of the array. So as you can see here, we're trying to access position 6, which doesn't exist. Our array only goes from 0 to 2. So we've got 0, 1, 2, 0, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So this doesn't exist, which is going to throw that exception. And a good programming habit would dictate that we try to avoid these range exceptions by checking whether the value we want, the 6 here, is actually within the array's index range, which we'll cover off in a later tutorial. But for now, we've had a look at just how you go about declaring an array and how we go about initializing them with data, and then covered off how we can access various elements within the array and either change the values or just get the data stored within that index. But arrays aren't the only collection types that C# has to offer, and in the next lesson we'll be looking at lists, which are more flexible and more common in programming. Well, that concludes this video on arrays. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did find it useful, it'll really help me out if you leave a like on the video. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next one.